The Venn diagram of queer folks and atheists who end up dejected or even rejected by their family of origin has a lot of overlap. So, just how common is it in today's world to experience that kind of family separation or alienation?
You know, Christy, it's a lot more common than one might think. And especially, like you said, many individuals last month during Pride Month were reminded of this and reminded
Hmm.
of that separation or rejection that may have experienced. But I mean, there's no secret that there's a lot of division in our country right now. And with that, the division comes in at a lot of different levels. So when individuals' core values or their morals are rejected from their family members, it can cause a lot of pain and hurt. And we're talking about differences in opinion or views regarding the Black Lives Matter movement, COVID-19 related differences, as well as very strong and different political views that are happening.
Yeah, I mean, it's an election year. We're seeing rampant conspiracy theories, a lot of mask debates,
Yeah.
widespread distrust of government, social outrage. I mean, how prepared should we be for things to get a lot worse before they get better?
Well, I feel as though, there's irreparable damage, unfortunately, in the trust of our government that has happened. For them to be able to act appropriately to keep all citizens safe, as well as hear people and citizens in their needs for social change. There's been quite a disruption all around. No one can really predict what will happen next, of course. However, I believe that we should be mentally prepared to be able to cope with the heaviness of the world indefinitely. To say it's going to end tomorrow is a dream. However, just taking the steps to take care of ourselves in the interim is so important. So I think it's best for now not to assume that this will all be over soon, but rather prepare ourselves for this ongoing issues, deeper societal issues that may not even be solved in our lifetime, unfortunately.
Hmm.
I've
You know,
actually found that it's easier to deal with knowing that it's going to be around for a while instead of wondering, is this going to end tomorrow? Is this a thing that I'm not going to have to think about in a week? When you look at it long term and like, okay, this is something that I'm going to have to incorporate into my life in a healthy way and have these kinds of conversations and do this kind of introspection, it actually, I feel, sets me up for a better way of coping, to just know that I've got some time to settle into this new life, this new routine, and find a healthy way to deal with everything.
Right.
yeah, lean into the weird. Just kind of accept that this is not going away anytime soon.
When
I
we
know
said
that.
keep Austin weird, this isn't what we meant.
Yeah, no, this
Right.
is I would call it a global weird, and I'm sure that's valid, but I mean, us here in the States are definitely having a different time of it, honestly, through our own making. And we can talk about what's just and what we deserve, but the crisis is dire. And even outside of this particular moment, I mean, in the 2 years that we've been doing this version of the show, we've gotten countless calls from folks, particularly, teenagers, people in their early to mid 20s who have been totally thrust out of their families, who find themselves with no social support, with no connection, often without any kind of home. And I know that there are a lot of people watching right now who are shaking their heads and saying that they would never do that to their own children, that they don't understand where that type of aggression or fixation on religious ideals and these kinds of ideas, how they would never kick out their own kids. And I'm sure that's true for many, many people, but it's still happening all the time. I mean, what kinds of things lead to this sort of violation of our family norms and expectations?
Well, typically, when an individual, for example, a parent, their inherent belief or certain core moral values are shaken by their child or by any family member, really, whether that be religious, family tradition, political tradition, that they hold so strongly to their core identity is questioned. the parent may become incredibly defensive or confused about how and why they may have brought up their child in a certain way, in a certain household with these certain beliefs, and then their child is coming to them questioning it or presenting them with different beliefs. And for some people, it's just so incredibly difficult for them to have their identity questioned like that. Durkheim, a very famous sociologist, brought up this notion of social norms in society, social norms and values, and being accepted into a group. Right. Well, that's not very different with a family setting and the norms that family systems hold. So, it can be said the same way, where in a family system, if an individual is ostracized or they're presenting these different views, they could be met with harsh criticism or withdrawal of support altogether. And all of this is in hope that the individuals who is exhibiting this deviant family behavior will begin adhering more closely to the group norms. However, most individuals will stand strong in what they believe and stand strong in their identity. So this produces, an extreme norm violation in the family, which then turns into ostracizing the individual and completely cutting off contact.
Mm-hmm. I mentioned at the top that this is something that a lot of queer folks experience, but it's also something a lot of atheists experience. Who is most vulnerable to this kind of risk? Who should we be concerned about losing access to their family?
Well, during this extreme political climate, when a lot of different issues are being brought out and in families and things are being questioned and different opinions are being brought forth, everyone is at risk. Everyone is at risk of having, a negative family member come forth and say, that's not right. You shouldn't believe in that. You shouldn't, feel that way, be that way. And, just depending on the individual's relatability or similarity to their family system, if they have any sort of differences in beliefs or values, they are at risk for this to happen.
So as we become maybe more polarized, we're also becoming more tribal, but
Right.
in this sort of weird modern understanding of what that means, because tribal used to refer to your family group, used to refer
Right.
to the people that you were interacting with so closely and for so long.
Right. Exactly.
What
Do
are,
you know? Sorry.
yeah, please speak.
Do you have an understanding? Every time I hear about a social norm and the violation and the reaction to the violation, it comes up a lot in the other shows that I'm on, and a lot in the conversations I have online. And I'm always curious to hear the perspective of people who know a little bit about this in terms of where that originally comes from. Like, what about the psychology? What about the history of our evolution makes that a thing that happens? Why do we react to violations of social norms in such a violent way?
Well, and thinking about exactly what Christy was saying and more of that like tribal sense, even dating back to then, there are these core beliefs in what is right and what is wrong. And when we're talking about somebody's identity or the way that they, believe or hold their values as part of their identity, it can get really confusing really, really quickly. So when it, like I was saying, when it's questioned, when that inherent belief or core value is questioned, or an individual comes forward saying, I don't align with you on this, unfortunately, people who have, lived their entire life in that identity just can't seem to wrap their head around it. It leaves them feeling confused. It leaves them feeling, ashamed. And so, altogether, there's a lot that can happen within family systems where their core is shaken. Their core identity is shaken to a point of no return. So unfortunately, yeah, it can turn violent. It can turn into something that some people can never imagine doing to family members. But when, your identity is in question, people, their true sense of self comes forward a little bit.
Yeah, I'm curious, V, if you have a beat on this, just philosophically, how a person's belief in a god or in these core values that Madison's referring to, how they can override something that we think of or assume as being so foundational. We think of like a parent's love for their child as the absolute bedrock of any society, but that's definitely not the case.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, it feels very much like a lot of these systems, especially the ones that are the most aggressive when confronted, have already wrapped possible confrontation into the mindset, into the doctrine, into the talking points. So it becomes less of a, oh, there's somebody contradicting this thing that I believe. That's interesting. That's never happened before. What does this mean? How do I deal with this? It becomes less of that, and there's already a narrative there implanted, right? There's already the narrative that, oh, when they're contradicting this belief, what they're actually saying is that they don't love me anymore, or they want to leave, or they think that I'm stupid, or, whatever it is, has already kind of been tainted by the fact that these conversations have been misrepresented at large. So I think, yeah, from a perspective of just looking at the systems themselves, it feels very much like you're set up for failure either way, whether you're the person being confronted or the person doing the confronting. There's this third party, which is the thought process itself, that often is in the way and really messes up that communication style.
Yeah, I mean, just responding quickly to some issues raised in the chat, I'm curious if this seems like something that is getting better or worse on the scale of like human history. Obviously, this is a moment of incredible tension in our country, but as our society gets bigger and bigger, as our population has doubled in the last 50, 60 some odd years, are tribes changing? Are they getting bigger? Are we more or less willing to accept our families as our dynamics shift? I don't know if those questions have answers, but I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts.
Yeah, well, I think it gets presented, especially in the age of social media and everything, where you're able to connect with people easily, that even if you aren't getting that familial support in the way that you want, my hope would be that you're able to find that elsewhere. You're able to find that acceptance, that love, just the genuine yearning to have your thoughts be heard by others who actually care and actually want to hear what you have to say. So I think what's happening too is a lot of individuals that are rejected by families, by their own families, going out and finding that support elsewhere. So it's, violating that familial norm of, always connecting with your blood and being super close to them. Well, there's other options, though. There's other people out there who are willing to respect you and love you for who you are.
Do you think that the fact that there are more communities, more family units, let's say, that are open to you, does that, maybe we've always been this divided, but we didn't have the option to go seek out a family unit that fits us better or accepts us for who we are? So perhaps it's less that nowadays people are fighting more internally with their families, with their communities, and more, oh, I can still survive if I leave this community. I can go find another one that has been set up to accommodate me better.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I should highlight for everybody here that a lot of this conversation kind of started or came from a blog that you wrote, Madison, and we've got links and things to that in the footnotes to this episode. I really encourage people to check that out. But you talk a lot about the difference between family of origin and your chosen family. And it sounds like that's a huge piece of what we're talking about here. As our global community becomes more accessible, queer folks in particular, who are just going to genetically spring up one in every 5 to 10 people, depending on how you measure it or who you ask, those people now have access to folks who are more like them. And that maybe is part of why I guess we're more willing to lose our family of origin, to shed our family of origin?
Right, exactly. Like I was saying, just being able to find that support elsewhere. And, family of choice is something that you're able to make on your own. Your family of origin is not what you choose, but what you're born into. And family of choice is individuals that you do choose to have in your life for a reason. You can kind of cherry pick them and they can cherry pick you right back to ensure that you instill that community, instill those ideals that you want from a family, that you want from others.
I'd imagine it's very similar to the stats about, divorce rates are skyrocketing. They skyrocketed right after it became okay to leave without cause, right? And it's less about, suddenly the institution of marriage is failing astronomically. It's, I have this option now. I'm financially independent. I can provide for myself. I'm not going to be shunned by the rest of society if I do this. So it feels, even statistically looks like there's this big shift happening when really it is that ability to stand on your own 2 feet a little bit better.
Yeah, whenever I do couples counseling and I'm working with a new couple, one of the first things I ask is, are we here to figure out how to stay together? Are we here to figure out how to break up in a kind and peaceful way? Or are we here to figure out which is which? And in that same way, it sounds like the family institution maybe hasn't been serving us all that well. And as much as we venerate it, as important as it is, it's crumbling a little bit, and that's concerning, but it's also crumbling because we may be replacing it with something that could be better serving to folks with minority views, with minority orientations or identities.
Yeah. Do you ask them both to say which one they're picking on the count of 3?
Yeah. It's usually something that comes up in the consultation, so they know. They have an answer. It may not be the right answer, but they tend to be very quick with the answer that they know. Well, Madison, one more question before I let Vi take us onto the phones.
Sure.
What, if any, are some of the warning signs? I know that varies family by family, situation by situation, but is there anything that we can glean from the law of big numbers, from looking at research and statistics on these issues?
Right. Well, I think warning signs, like number one, that's sometimes unnoticeable, is the grief that comes up. So estrangement and separation isn't necessarily something that always happens in, you're cut off, I'm never talking to you again. It doesn't always happen right then and there. It might be a slow process. So grief sometimes goes unnoticed in the way that it can grow and happen over a period of time. The loss is processed at a delayed rate. So when you, as the adult child, for example, find yourself policing your thoughts or policing your views around your family members when you're having a conversation with them, or maybe they're speaking out about what they believe, or you're avoiding certain topics, just out of fear of sharing your own opinion, that it to me is a warning sign that you're stopping yourself from being your true self and being able to share your thoughts openly. I think another common warning sign is just avoiding communication altogether. You call your parents once a week, and then that kind of trickles off because you just don't want to have these conversations because they're exhausting to you. So another thing to notice, exhaustion after having, even a short conversation with family members.
Yes.
Just it from the parental view, or, just any family member that you may be having these issues with, when you notice excessive attempts to control you, to police your thoughts and things like that, where it's noticeable, that's, just again, another warning sign to kind of look out for.
Yeah, I just, as a quick aside, think it's a really good thing for people to be taking notice of what leaves them exhausted. So much of being a therapist is just like, yeah, and how did that feel? Because people aren't always asking themselves those questions, and it's a really valuable data point to be, basing your life on.
Absolutely.